Good day. My name is David Wild, and this is the second part of a three-part presentation on Chapter 9 on strategic management from Connect Master Management 2.0. We'll begin this part looking at industry analysis. Different types of business people use industry analysis for different reasons, but they are all trying to understand what makes some industries more attractive than others. When we think about the forces in industries that affect firms' profits and how firms compete against each other, we need to first consider the important distinction between value creation and value capture. These concepts are shown to you graphically in Figure 2 taken from your text, which you can see on screen now. Value creation is the difference between a customer's buyer value or their willingness to pay and the firm's cost in offering a product or service. The firm is bearing costs to produce something that a customer values even more. Value capture, on the other hand, is the profits a firm obtains by charging a price more than its cost for a product or service. The goal of industry analysis is to identify specific characteristics of industries that can affect the value captured by firms operating in an industry. The most popular and well-known tool for carrying out industry analysis is called the Five Forces Framework, which we will address in a moment. So in summary on industry analysis, industry analysis helps pinpoint the sources of value capture for an organization, or how it is able to earn superior profits within a specific marketplace. Organizations need to create products and services that customers value more than the cost an organization incurs. Finally, when the organization creates value and does so better than competitors, it is in a position to capture value. And now we turn to the Five Forces Framework. Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School summarized the potential industry-level factors that can shape value capture in the so-called Five Forces Framework. As you can see, Figure 3 on your screen, taken from the text, is Porter's Five Forces Framework. This structure captures the five main threats to industry profitability. Each of these forces or threats has a negative effect on value capture, so managers need to be able to identify when these threats exist and then take the proper steps to secure better profits for their firms. Ideally, these threats will be low, and an industry will enjoy high profitability for a sustained period of time. But managers need to be able to act when this is not the case. And we will now talk about each of the five forces separately. First, the threat of rivalry. One important threat to value capture is the level of rivalry within an industry. Rivalry between firms will grow when there are many firms in an industry, a situation known as industry fragmentation. When there are a small number of firms operating in a concentrated industry, it is called an oligopoly. And if there is only one firm, the industry is called a monopoly. Product differentiation is the unique product attributes that customers value. Product differentiation is high for lifestyle products like Coke and Pepsi, given the brands and loyal customers they have developed over time. Product commoditization is the loss of product differentiation when multiple firms have similar offerings. This has taken place in the computer business due to open technologies available to many computer manufacturers. As a result, rivalry has been fierce in the case of computers, but more constrained in the case of carbonated soft drinks. Several other conditions can make the threat of rivalry high. One is overcapacity, when firms can supply more output than is needed to make demand. Overcapacity is a threat because it represents lost profits. Companies are able to produce more, but there is not enough demand to sell everything. The oil industry provides an example of a setting where overcapacity often occurs. Exit costs, or the expenses incurred in shutting down operations, are high, and in this industry, these outlays are due partly to environmental cleanup costs. The development of many alternative energy sources, as well as the increased oil refining capacity in China and other countries, have exacerbated the overcapacity problem. Next, there is the threat of entry. Firms can also face a potential threat from other firms that have not yet entered the industry. This is the case when it is easy for new firms to enter a new industry or market. In some cases, there may be barriers to entry that will discourage new firms from entering the industry despite the high profits of established firms. When these barriers to entry exist, the threat of entry will be lower, and the industry will be able to enjoy a higher level of profitability on a sustained basis. When barriers to entry are low, entry is easier, and profits will tend to be lower in an industry. One example of an entry barrier is scale economies, or falling unit cost with higher levels of output. For example, if a company tries to enter a specific market and decides to manufacture a small number of products to sell, its unit cost will be much higher than firms already in the marketplace, and it will face a cost disadvantage. If the company decides to flood the market with products and lower its unit cost, it could face retaliation from the established firms in the industry, certainly a trade-off that needs to be considered. Learning economies are another type of entry barrier that might need to be overcome. In the case of scale economies, unit costs fall because of spreading fixed cost over more units of output in a given time frame. Another reason unit cost might fall is because the firm gets better and better at making a product through the accumulation of knowledge and experience over time, which is known as learning economies. Finally, in certain politically sensitive industries, like the defense industry, it might not be possible for foreign firms to enter. There will also be regulations on market entries in other industries as well, such as what we see with airlines today. In medicine, law, and other service sectors, new entrants need to obtain a license to provide services, which can reduce entry and increase salaries in certain professions. A major source of entry in industries will be new businesses, rather than established firms diversifying into the industry. The regulations and hassles of simply complying with the legal procedures to start a new business vary across countries. The third of Porter's 5 forces we'll talk about is the threat of substitutes. When doing an industry analysis, managers need to define the scope of the industry, or what firms you will consider within the industry. Sometimes this is a straightforward process. In other cases, however, it can be difficult to determine the precise boundaries of an industry. If the industry is defined too broadly, it will be difficult to reach conclusions on each of the 5 forces. When an industry is defined more narrowly, however, the influence of related products or services will be identified in the threat of substitute category. Substitutes may be defined as products or services that offer similar benefits to consumers as the ones already produced by firms within a specific industry. In other situations, if the substitute product is easy to learn and presents clear advantages to a customer, he or she is more likely to switch to the substitute offering. In other cases, even if a substitute is functionally similar, switching might be less likely to happen. For example, learning new software might be time-consuming even if it offers benefits to a user. Another possibility is that there might be product complements, not substitutes, in a particular market. Complements may be defined as products or services that can be used to enhance or improve another product or service. The threat of suppliers. The threats to profitability also come from suppliers and buyers. The greater the bargaining power of suppliers, the greater the threat of suppliers, as this will tend to raise a firm's cost. Suppliers tend to have lower bargaining power over firms that have many options for their supply chain vendors. If there are many potential suppliers, the firm, not the supplier, has greater bargaining power. When there are limited outside options, however, suppliers have more power and can negotiate favorable terms for themselves at the expense of firms in the industry. The relative size of suppliers and firms also determines their respective bargaining power. Smaller firms have less bargaining clout, and this might lead them to try and grow bigger to capture more value from suppliers. A firm can also engage in backward vertical integration by acquiring a supplier to exert its bargaining power. The flip side of this is that suppliers can engage or threaten to engage in forward vertical integration, which is the acquisition of a customer or other entity in an effort to control the distribution or supply of the company's products. Finally, there is the threat of buyers. The same tug-of-war and bargaining that exists between suppliers and firms also applies to firms and their buyers in the supply chain. For this reason, a mirror image set of factors determines if buyers have significant bargaining power over firms. If there are few buyers, or a firm cannot effectively play them off against each other, then buyers have greater bargaining power. Buyers will have more power when it is easy for them to switch suppliers. In some situations, like canceling internet or cell phone contracts, customers must pay fees. In other cases, the cost of switching can also be seen in terms of the effort required or psychological cost once an individual has built up loyalty to a certain brand. Buyers will also have more bargaining power when they have good information on a product or service. Buyers will also be more of a threat to profitability when they are price sensitive, because they will tend to demand lower prices and balk at price increases. Price sensitivity will tend to be greater when a product represents a large part of a buyer's income. So, what are the main implications of Porter's 5 Forces framework? Let's start with some of the most important lessons. First, the framework enables managers to analyze more rigorously the threats facing their company, which can reduce profitability. The framework captures the essence of strategy. Think ahead by reasoning backward. It suggests that the profitability of a firm will depend on how other businesses conduct themselves, and this depends on the structure of an industry. The intensity of competition isn't a matter of good luck or misfortune. It is rooted in the structure of an industry. This is why some industries are intrinsically more profitable than others. The framework explains what determines value capture. Each of these 5 threats will reduce the size of value capture. The lower these threats, the larger the value capture. So, in summary on the 5 Forces framework, managers use the 5 Forces framework to rigorously analyze the threats to profitability, and this tool allows them to dig far more deeply into the T in SWOT analysis. Each of the five forces can reduce the value of a firm and what it can capture by either increasing the firm's cost or putting pressures on the price it can charge. For instance, when suppliers have significant bargaining power over a company, they will charge more for supplies to the company, thereby increasing the company's cost. Increased rivalry puts downward pressure on prices. Not only does this happen due to competition with direct rivals, but the threat of new entrants coming into an industry and the threat of customers switching to a substitute product or service also puts downward pressure on prices and profitability. Finally, in addition to considering the five threats to profitability, rivalry, entry, substitutes, suppliers, and buyers, managers must evaluate the sources of each of these threats. Factors like investments needed, scale economies, product differentiation, and so on, and how these affect the levels of the five forces. And with that, we conclude the second part of our lecture on Chapter 9 on strategic management.